The story of the Israelites' conquest of the Promised Land has long been an article of faith for Jews and Christians alike. The Bible tells us how, led by Joshua, they crossed the Jordan and tumbled the walls of Jericho with mighty trumpet blasts. In quick succession, the pagan cities of Canaan fell before their righteous assaults. And all the cities of all the kings of them did Joshua take, and smote them with the edge of the sword. And he utterly destroyed them as Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded. So goes the scriptural account. But today, a number of archaeologists challenge the historical accuracy of that biblical narrative. Their findings suggest that the Canaanite cities may have been destroyed decades before the first Israelite settlements. That they settled peacefully and gradually. And that heresy of heresies, that the Israelites were themselves Canaanite peasants. Is it possible then that the Israelite conquest of the Promised Land simply never happened? When Jesus of Nazareth was spreading the gospel of the New Testament through the Holy Land, these ruins were already 1,000 years old. This is the kingdom of Hatzor, all that remains of a mighty empire that 2 millennia before the birth of Christ reigned in the Middle East. To the ancient world, it was known as the land of Canaan. But to the Hebrews of the Old Testament, it was the Promised Land. Hatzor has lured archaeologist Amnon Ben-Tor in search of clues to an age-old question, rather a series of questions. Who were the Israelites? Where did they come from? Did Joshua lead an army across the Jordan River to conquer Canaan, as the Bible says?
I don't know if there was a Joshua, but I look to find the period described in Joshua. 11th century, 12th century. Somewhere here, this is where they are. These bricks here, that's Canaanite. These stones here, this is Israelite, but of the time of the monarchy. What's missing in here, that's Joshua, or the time of Joshua.
Ben-Tor hopes that the answer may be found here, in the great Canaanite palace at Hatzor.
This is Canaanite Hatzor, the head of all those kingdoms. There's no building like it anywhere in Hatzor, and I don't think in the entire country. It's really big. So, and it lies all under where we are standing. This is Canaanite, look there. This is Ahab, or the 9th century. Over there, that's Solomon, 10th century. Over there, 8th century, the period of the kings. Okay, so Joshua, judges, kings, one on top of the other. The only one that is missing is in between. Israelites under Joshua, that's what we are looking for. Up there, those are the Golan Heights. Very controversial, no?
Why?
I thought we were talking about Joshua.
But in Israel, the story of Joshua is never far from present-day controversy. The archaeology at Hatzor, within sight of those embattled heights, has political overtones in a country where historical claim to the land is a matter of war and peace. For it was here that Joshua and the Israelites finished their righteous conquest of the Holy Land, according to the Old Testament. They put to the sword all who were in it, utterly destroying them. There were none left that breathed. And he burned Hatzor with fire.
Look how dark it is, how black it is. Look at all those fallen mud bricks. This is the real end of Hatzor. Look at the ashes, almost 1.5 meters of debris, of ashes, of wooden beams, of pottery, of all kinds of finds, and we are not yet down to the actual floor. So this is going to be a real big thing.
Was it the Israelites who destroyed Hatzor, fulfilling their destiny as foretold in the Bible?
Now, this is Hatzor, and this is the Bible. The question is, do they indeed correlate? Does it really mean that, as it is written in the Bible, this is how it happened? This is still an open question. We don't know. Because it says so in the Bible doesn't necessarily mean that it is wrong, okay? It may very well be so, but it is for us to prove. It may very well be that somebody else destroyed Chatzor, and in the book of Joshua, or whoever wrote the book of Joshua, attributed the story to the Israelites.
For now, the answer remains hidden in the rubble of Hatzor. Amnon Ben Tor and his team are continuing their search for the missing chapter from the time of Joshua. Although their efforts are not always rewarded, today they have made a new find.
So it's just like a little scarab. You see the head here, and the wings and everything. Nice, huh?
Very nice. What year? Okay.
This is about 8th century, something like this, 9th century. It's about 2,800 years old, maybe something like this. I don't know, we have to study it.
Young.
We have very young, yesterday. We have to study it. It's the period of the kings of Israel. Yeah. That's the Israelites, no question. But was Joshua, definitely. Unfortunately, not Joshua.
So Moses commanded, so Joshua did. According to Scripture, the conquest of Canaan was the last act in a drama that began with the triumphant exodus of the Israelites from Egypt. Moses led the 12 tribes of Israel into the wilderness. When they came upon Mount Sinai, Moses went up to the mountain to receive the 10 Commandments. Moses died before reaching the Promised Land. His servant Joshua would lead the Israelites across the Jordan River. At Jericho, the Lord commanded them to march around the city for 6 days. On the 7th, trumpets were sounded, the people shouted, and the walls came crashing down. For over a century, archaeologists have sought to verify the conquest as related in the book of Joshua. Today, a new generation of Israeli archaeologists is challenging the validity of the Old Testament as a historical document. Israel Finkelstein has surveyed hundreds of ancient settlements throughout Israel. He thinks the Battle of Jericho never happened.
The conquest theory in Jericho was really disproved years ago. I think that it's a process of maybe 30 or 50 years of excavations. Excavations in the sites which are mentioned in the Bible in the conquest narrative reveal that either the sites were not at all inhabited at the time, or that the destruction of the Canaanite sites was a gradual and long process which took 150 years. Simply, this was not done by a group of people in one year or in several years or in a short period of time.
If Joshua's conquest of Canaan is a myth, then how did the Israelites reach the Promised Land? Over the past decade, Adam Zertal has also uncovered dozens of new sites. He believes they migrated peacefully into Canaan.
We're looking now backward on Wadi Farah. I believe that along this road, the Israelites has entered from the Jordan that we can see on the opening, and gradually entered and penetrated into the sedentary life, into the land of the Promised Land. Now we know that these Israelites were half nomads, and they moved gradually into sedentary, settled life.
Zertal is convinced that the Israelites were originally nomads who came across the Jordan River and settled around Wadi Farah, the only perennial source of water in the region. Here they could live on the land and graze their flocks year-round. Eventually, they gave up their traditional nomadic tents for more permanent structures, like these crude mud huts unique to Wadi Farah.
I think in a very firm way that they were foreigners who came from the other side of the Jordan. They were not Canaanites, since they were not directed from the Canaanite city-states to this land, but vice versa.
Although Zertal has discarded the conquest theory in favor of his peaceful migration theory, he is equally passionate about a new discovery.
We were digging here without understanding what it was. We didn't even dare to dream that we deal here with Joshua's altar.
He believes he has found the altar built by Joshua at Mount Ebal after the Israelites reached the Promised Land.
That was a moment I'll never forget until the last day of my life. We couldn't sleep for a couple of nights, because then it was a very good proof that we deal here with a real first Israelite altar, where our people has started the real roots of everything, not only of the Jewish culture, but probably of all the Western civilization. I still can remember this enthusiasm and this excitement, I think, never to be repeated in my lifetime.
However, not everyone agrees with Zertal.
Well, Mount Ebal may be a cult site, but the altar, as far as I'm concerned, is Zertal's sheer imagination.
Israel Finkelstein has proposed yet another new theory for the origin of the Israelites. Convinced that they were not immigrants, Finkelstein argues that many were probably Canaanites, as were their fathers and their fathers before them.
I think that the Israelites were probably local people who were probably sedentary people in the middle of the second millennium. Then there was a collapse of the urban culture, there was a process of nomadization, and after a few centuries, re-sedentarization. They were Canaanites because they lived in Canaan of the second millennium BC.
And for Amihai Mazar, clues that the Israelites emerged from Canaan sometimes come from unsuspected sources.
This little bronze bull was found by me in a kibbutz antiquities collection. It was found by a soldier training in the northern Samaria mountains, not far from Shechem, north of Shechem, biblical Shechem. It was found on a remote mountain, and I was shown the place exactly where it was found. We excavated there, and we could date it to this time, the 12th century BC, the period of the Israelite settlement. And we believe that the place where this bull was found was a high place. That means it was a sanctuary, an open-air sanctuary, utilized by those Israelites in the early phase of their settlement there. Now, this is a very interesting find, because we know that the Canaanites, much earlier, also used or had in their sanctuaries bronze bulls made in a very similar fashion. So we can claim that this little bull illustrates Canaanite traditions and inspiration on the early Israelite religion and cult.
If the Israelites were Canaanites all along, when did they emerge as a unified people with a cultural identity?
You cannot just ask who are the Israelites, because you must also be specific about a time in history. Under Joshua, or in the period described in the book of Joshua, did they know that they were Israelites? We don't know. We don't have enough historical evidence for this. But obviously many people who joined in this new force were local or were from here, and it was a mixture of people, you see.
Whether or not they identify themselves as Israelites, this mixture of people was somehow different. In the archaeological layers of Hatzor, the settlement after the Great Fire is quite distinct from its Canaanite predecessors.
So we have something different. Is this something different, Israelite or not? For the time being, I think it is. But for the time being, we don't have an absolute proof. We need something else, which I don't know if we shall ever find. Maybe we need a lot more of the same. But I think these are the Israelites. And it's a different page in a different story.
The Old Testament contains a second version of the conquest that contradicts the book of Joshua. In the book of Judges, the Israelites dwelled side by side with the Canaanites until a crisis threatened to overwhelm them. The world was turned upside down.
Around 1200 BC, a crisis burst throughout the ancient Near East. Many cities collapsed. The empires collapsed. The Hittite Empire, the Egyptian Empire. After 1150 BC, the Egyptian Empire did not survive anymore. And many of those Canaanite city-states, Canaanite cities, for example, the largest, the most well-known one is Hatzor in the Galilee, disappeared. They just ceased to exist.
In fact, the world as they knew it ceased to exist. A golden age of trade and prosperity had linked Canaan to the empires of the Mediterranean and the Aegean. When they collapsed, the social, economic, and political fabric of the Canaanite city-states collapsed with them. Today, most archaeologists agree that against this backdrop of turmoil and unrest, small groups of shepherds and herders, now politically independent and economically self-reliant, wandered into the isolated hills of Canaan to begin a new life. Out of their experience slowly emerged a new culture and a new identity. In time, they would become known as the Israelites. Does this new theory, based on decades of archaeological research, mean the Bible is wrong? Does it diminish the legend that has sustained Israel for centuries? Perhaps it puts it in perspective.
We have to understand that the Bible is not a source for describing the origin of Israel, for the simple reason that the biblical narrative was compiled at least, or even written in Jerusalem in the 7th century BC. And in many ways it reflects the ideas, the ideology, the economic affairs, the political affairs of the people of Jerusalem in the 7th century, which means 5 centuries after the supposed events took place.
It's a question of how you look on the Bible. There are many points of view on the Bible. Of course, fundamentalists, both Christians and Orthodox Jews, believe in the Bible as the Word of God, and they accept its history as the true history. On the other hand, we have ultra-critical scholars, starting in the late 19th century and up to our own days, who claim that much of the biblical narrative is just literary fiction.
Archaeology is not here to prove or disprove the Bible. I mean, the Bible, as a book written in divine inspiration, needs no proof.
Professor Avram Beran is a veteran archaeologist who began excavating in Israel before it became a state. He now teaches biblical archaeology at Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem.
Take Jericho. How many articles and books have been written? Did the walls of Jericho came falling down? Now, I don't know if it really matters. There must have been some kind of a historical element in the story, but we don't know which of the layers of occupation of Jericho can be ascribed to it. We don't know when it took place exactly. But to me, the myth of Jericho, if you like, has sustained the Israelites and the Jewish people for thousands of years.
But for Adam Zertal, each chapter and verse of the Old Testament is incontestably etched in these stones.
The debate cannot be whether the Israelites were Israelites, because the Israelite entity here is quite clear by, as I said, the similarity with the Bible and the later Jewish temple in Jerusalem.
In the Holy Land, biblical archaeology often reflects modern longings as much as ancient truths.
How does archaeology, how does material culture relate to the biblical narratives? And here, this is a question of what's important. You cannot answer it in general. You have to say, for whom? There are some people who need, for one reason or another, to have 100% correlation between archaeology and the biblical narrative in order to prove or to give them confidence or to give them a sense of identity, to give them roots in history. For a dozen different reasons, people need to have 100% correlation. Others, I'd say, like me, I don't need 100% correlation. I don't need to read a chapter in the Bible and then run to the field and see, can I find something which relates to this or not? My identity as an Israeli, I don't think it has anything to do with one theory or another in the book of Joshua. For some it is important, for others it's not.
And in the larger perspective, archaeology perhaps serves the needs of a nation over time.
When I was brought up 30 years ago in the education system in Israel, I was brought up on the narrative of the conquest of Canaan and destroying the local people and so on. And I'm not sure that this is the way that we have to look at things today. It's important for us, I think, in Israel, for the way that we shape our culture and our identity today, in the sense that it teaches us, I think, to find a way to live with our neighbors.
In the present-day turmoil of the Middle East, archaeology has shed new light on this ancient landscape. Far from shattering myth, it has enriched an epic tale of struggle and survival that continues to rock the political landscape of Israel today. In an earlier time, the suggestion that the Israelites were themselves Canaanites would have earned its author a public stoning. Yet in the timeless interplay of science and religion, one era's heresy is often another's article of faith. Perhaps tomorrow, the idea of the Israelites as Canaanites will be no more earth-shaking than the theory of evolution.
Well, here we have maybe an unholy trinity. Okay? There's archaeology, there is Bible, there is politics.
If we want to learn about the exploits of some of the earliest warriors and the weapons they fought with, we need only look in the Bible. The Old Testament gives a detailed military history of the 12 tribes of the Israelites and their fight for survival.
This time on Conquest, we experience the weapons of the Bible.
The lands of the Bible are squeezed between the Mediterranean Sea and the desert. To the north is Syria and Asia Minor. To the south, Egypt. To the east, the empires of Mesopotamia. This area used to be called the land of Canaan. It's only 70 miles wide, and it's absolutely essential in a strategic position as the sole land bridge between Eurasia and Africa. In times of peace, it was essential for commerce. In wartime, essential for military maneuver. The Israelites controlled most of this land for most of 12 centuries. We're going to find out how they did it, and you are going to learn how to win with the weapons of the Bible.
In the 18th century BCE, there was a great movement of peoples from the east into the eastern Mediterranean, of which the major group were the Hyksos. They invaded Egypt and defeated the mighty Egyptian army, who were equipped with inferior weapons of stone, wood, and early bronze.
The Hyksos succeeded partly by military technology. They had superior bronze weapons and the ultimate shock force of fast chariots, and an excellent missile weapon, the Asiatic composite bow. Now, this was of recurved design, made of horn and sinew, with an effective range of 200 yards. The only disadvantage of this was that it was extremely difficult and expensive to make, and often took up to a year to finish. Now, these modern copies are 55 pounds draw weight, which is extremely strong for a small bow, and so strong, in fact, I'm going to need help stringing it. So, could you give me a push? Now, these were truly powerful weapons. From now on, massed archery ruled the battlefield. So, you'd better learn how to use these.
Archery was so effective in this period because good armor was rare. Most was of stiffened cloth or leather, sometimes strengthened with scales of bronze, with helmets of hardened leather or bronze. Eventually, Egypt expelled the Hyksos by copying the weapons of their enemies, especially the bow and the chariot. By the time of the New Kingdom in Egypt, the Israelites were treated as a hostile population. Sometime during the 13th century BCE, they were led out of bondage in Egypt by their leader, Moses. Later, under Joshua, they began the conquest of the land of Canaan.
At this time, the Israelites were still nomadic. They were a collection of individual Bronze Age warriors. They fought with a spear and javelin, bows and slings, clubs, many types of axes, swords and shields. These are the classic weapons of the ancient period, but what's important is what they were made of. Now, they still used flint and stone warheads and blades, and these could be extremely sharp, but they had to be short, and they often shattered on impact. The best blades were made of metal. The first metal blades were made of copper, but this is an extremely soft material. But if you take 7 parts copper to 1 part of tin, you get an alloy called bronze. Now here's a nice new shiny bronze axe head. This was a very much harder material and could take a good edge, but you still had to be careful with it. It was brittle, and it could blunt very easily. And in the Middle East, bronze was often of poor quality because of the rarity of tin, but it made some good weapons. Right, team, it's time we learned how to use these bronze weapons. And the one thing you won't be doing with them is any kind of Hollywood swordplay, like this. Bronze weapons simply will not stand up to this. These are modern steel copies. Let's look at the real thing. First, with a long sword. It's absolutely pointless to try and think of any kind of cuts against bronze armor or bronze shields. All you're going to do is blunt your sword. Also, you're not going to be able to take any kind of parry. You thrust at me, there's a good chance that your sword or mine will break, so don't allow your sword to be cut down onto. Now, these aren't useless weapons, but you just have to rethink your whole idea of swordplay. You push shield against shield, and you try and find the gaps, the unarmored places on the body, low on the leg, up to the face, into the gut. Now, there were various different types of swords called kopesh. Now, these are based on an Egyptian design. It's almost impossible to believe that this sort of sword was actually used, but they're shown throughout antiquity, so they must have been used somehow. One like this would certainly be used as a cutting, slashing weapon. I would try and smash your shield aside and then come in with a head cut to smash right through it, cleave through it, and through you. Now, the bronze spearhead meant that the spear could really come into its own as a fighting weapon. Spear fighting technique is a whole technique to itself. There's all kinds of thrusts and parries. If you parry too far out, don't, because I can come under and in. Now, the short spear, the javelin, the bronze head made it a much more effective weapon. It made it much better balanced and a much deadlier weapon. Now, there were many different types of axe. Everything from this double-handed monster to this nice, short, sharp one. Now, with this, it does have a sharp blade, but frankly, that's not important with this. This one relies on weight. You try and cleave through your opponent's shield or armor. Now, I'm going to cut at you. I want you to try and hit back at me, all right? Very good. Not finished yet. Yeah, you're too good at this. Go away.
From around 9000 BCE began the process we call civilization. Settled agricultural states were established, and the ownership of land became important for the first time. Defensible land and the new possibilities for trade led to the creation of the first walled cities and to the formation of the first semi-professional armies. Now, you guys will be armed with short swords or axes, with spears and with shields, and with some basic armor and helmets of bronze or leather. So pick up your shield.